Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. Exciting race weekend of NASCAR, INDYCAR, and MotoGP. Will recap all three race weekends. We're a month away from the Grid Endurance Performance Index and the Grid Rankings starting up on the first Sunday of April. Hello, I'm Joe Sandiego, and with me we have Emily Sharp from Women in Motorsports, Kobe Lambert from Grid Tonight, and Tanner Smith from PitboxPress.com. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Con the Show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. Link in the video description to become a monthly investor. We also appreciate Buy Me a Coffee and YouTube Super Chat. We'll thank you on the air as we see those contributions to keep us on the air come in. Emily, let's start the show with NASCAR Cup Series, Circus of America, one of the premier tracks, and I felt today we saw a premier level type of racing out there today.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. And I agree. Let's kick things right off with NASCAR. It was a dramatic finish to the NASCAR Cup Series race earlier today, just about an hour and a half ago at COTA. And Christopher Bell makes it two in a row with William Byron finishing in second. Tyler Reddick came home in third. Now, Tanner, these three drivers have made it the championship four in the last 2 years. Bell is now a two-time winner this year and is on a two-race winning streak, which is just an incredible start to his season. And he himself came from 19th place to come around Kyle Busch in, again, a very thrilling end. Is Bell and his team the best out there right now? Tanner, Joe, starting with you.
Yeah, you've definitely got to throw your hats off to the DeWalt team and specifically crew chief Adam Stevens. It's not easy to go from winning a super speedway style race at Atlanta last week and come back the following week at a very tough and demanding road course such as the Circuit of the Americas NASCAR course and come out and win that race as well within a week's time. I obviously want to make sure that we wait until we get through at least like Las Vegas really to start pinning a team to be, the strongest in the field, because that's our real test of being on a real racetrack at an intermediate with this car. But you've really got to be impressed with the versatility of Bell and Adam Stevens. They were able to regroup from that victory and have a really solid plan and strategy coming into this afternoon's event. And now they're the winners of two in a row and looking at no signs of slowing down. So hats off to them.
Big hats off to those two. They were up there in contention at the Daytona 500. Cole Custer, a bad push, ruined that day. They were up there in contention for Atlanta. The caution flag came out in the last lap. We will never know how that would have turned out had that not occurred. Today, on a day where we saw drivers like Kyle Larson making mistakes, his pit crew making mistakes, drivers like Shane Van Gisbergen that we thought would be the heavy favorite just did not seem to have the car and just was really out there beaten today. Then other drivers making mistakes, taking out contention because of things out of their control. Christopher Bell from starting outside the top 10 coming towards the front to get the win. What an effort. He drove a very great race, just racing Kyle Busch very hard, very clean. There was that moment he locked up, and I thought, we're going to have contact. Just missed Kyle. And one of the things in that post-race press conference, Christopher Bell said, I race people clean. I feel I have a lot of respect in the garage area. That's why we saw some good racing. We didn't see William Byron just give him the bumper on the last lap. I feel Christopher Bell is right now the real deal. But as you said, Tanner, it is a very long season. Once we get to the summer, where it just seems to be week after week after week, the summer seems to wear teams down. If his team could keep that momentum going, Christopher Bell could keep racing on the level he is, in my opinion, I think he's better than Kyle Larson right now. He'll be hard to beat.
Yeah, Joe. And someone who probably felt like it was a long last 14 laps was Kyle Busch. I mean, he was so close to earning a win here, but his tires fell out and lost the lead ultimately in the end. Joe, starting with you, do you see the 8 being weekly race contenders for the win, or is RCR still behind?
It's very hard to tell just because it seems with this team, RCR in general, they're either hit or miss. One thing I think really stood out, this track, very little grip. We saw the car slipping and slide, and I feel that's what really helps Kyle Busch makes the most out of the car. There's a track like a Darlington where the grip level's not there. He can make the car come towards the front, try to take care of the tires best he can. We saw that today. We're going to go to Phoenix. I'm not sure that's going to be exactly a track that's going to be great for Kyle Busch, that RCR group. In the first two races, well, I mean, drafting style races, I think the big key will be once we get to some of these tracks where grip is not going to be there, looking at Kansas, Charlotte, Darlington. If he's strong there, then I think this is more what he's bringing. I still think RCR might be behind, especially the other Chevrolet teams.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Joe. I obviously am pretty encouraged by how well they have been able to qualify at the 8 team this year thus far. And, we kind of touched on it earlier. They haven't really gone to like a real true blue intermediate track to kind of test out exactly how good their speed is. But, it's definitely more encouraging than, say, last season where it just seemed like, even from the very beginning after that Atlanta loss, they just seemed like they were searching for an identity and searching for speed at any place that they could possibly get it. And that led to Kyle Busch, making a number of mistakes and unfortunately getting himself involved in some accidents that normally we don't see him getting himself into. So, it's definitely a good start for them to even have race winning speed. And I think had that race gone green to the end and his teammate and Denny Hamlin not had that insanely odd incident happen, we may be having a different conversation, because I'm going to be honest, I don't think Bell has the car or the time to make up the gap of over 5 seconds to Busch and having to also get by Byron in that time. So, you've got to take this race as a bit of a win if you're the 8 team, but obviously you really want that trophy, and hopefully they aren't too far away from it for Kyle Busch's sake.
Yeah, and gentlemen, we've been talking about last weekend's race. I want to bring it up again here. Of course, we saw Ross approach Carson after the Atlanta race. This weekend, Ross Chastain made another very aggressive move at the start of the race. He spun Chase Elliott around, damage to Connor Zilisch, damage to Denny Hamlin. Elliott, obviously not happy with Chastain late in the race. Chastain slowed and let Elliott pass him to avoid any form of retaliation. So, safe to say, overly aggressive too early. How much does this hurt his credibility here? Tanner, let's start with you.
I don't know how much it necessarily tarnishes his credibility, but as far as like trying to go over to the younger drivers and lecture them for their aggressiveness, you've lost every bit of credibility you're going to have, because you can't be mad at Carson Hocevar going, all out there with the overtime finish last week and trying to win a race. And we all know this from watching open wheel racing for many, many years. You cannot win the race in turn 1. Now, if you're Lando Norris, you can lose the race in turn 1. But you can't win the race in turn 1, and that's exactly what Ross Chastain tried to do. That was an overtime, double overtime level move where you're diving 5 cars deep onto the inside. You're rubbing up against the paint that goes on the inside of the corner. It was such a desperate and just goofy move. I don't really know what he was thinking, to be honest with you. And it was just such a boneheaded mistake from a guy that has been trying so hard to repair his image of being too aggressive. And then you go out and do something that ill-advised. It's just, Ross Chastain really just needs to figure out who he wants to be, because I think that's been his issue these past couple of years. We've seen him still dial up the aggression every now and again, like when he was racing with Ryan Blaney at Phoenix in 2023. They both respectfully got the elbows out and were trading paint with each other, and that was great to see. I think that's Ross at his most optimal. But when you have a race like today where he's just barging through people and bowling them over. It's just, you got to wonder what possessed him to come over and give Carson Hocevar a talking to when he probably should have had some people coming over to his car tonight instead.
As you said, Tanner, 1 week to be talking about Carson Hocevar about whatever he talked about. And Carson Hocevar was going for a win in overtime. And then the following week, that's why I think it's going to hurt him more, Ross Chastain, is the fact that this is just happening a week later when you make this move that, as you perfectly said, you could certainly lose a race on the first lap. This is the first lap. What are you doing? There's no point in doing this. I just could not believe when he was making his move. I was just thinking, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. There's going to be contact. And if all the people chase Elliott, which, of course, the last time he made a move that people were split about, Darlington took out Kyle Larson, a Chevrolet, a Hendrick Motorsports car. Mr. H is not going to be happy about this. Chevrolet is certainly not going to be happy about this. I was thinking if Ross Chastain was talking to Carson Hocevar about, you should have helped me because we're Chevrolets, well, look what you did. You just spun out not only a Chevrolet driver, the most popular driver in NASCAR, Chase Elliott. This was clearly just over-aggressive and honestly not thinking. If this was double overtime, it's been a crazy race, and you got something that could maybe work, go for it, because you might get that third overtime if you're still in the lead. But overall, for Ross Chastain, I just feel this will really hurt, especially since Denny Hamlin was involved in this. I'm curious to see what Denny Hamlin's going to be saying tomorrow on his podcast, coming off what happened with Carson Hocevar last week. Just absolutely poor timing. If this was a race in the playoffs and we had gone through the entire season, I think people would have said, okay, circumstances. Well, here's the circumstances. First lap, first corner. What are you doing, Ross? Just way over his head.
Yeah, I agree with you, gentlemen. Nothing good came out of that move other than the phrase calamity corner, which I'm fully on board to get going. And every time that we got to see that turn in turn one again. So again, a very aggressive move. Kind of switching topics here a bit. Connor Zilic, many predicted he could be an upset winner today. But again, back to calamity corner on lap one, put him in the back. He was fast, working his way up though. But then he ended up getting collected when Daniel Suarez got spun around. Teammates crashed into each other, many predicting Zilic could get in the 99. Now, if you're Justin Marks, did this weekend shift thinking about Suarez and Zilic's future? Joe, what are your thoughts?
For Justin Marks, he probably wants to forget about this weekend with the things Ross Chastain did, than to have Daniel Suarez go out there, spin, collect Connor Zilic. Oh, what just a painful race weekend. And then the hope was, of course, Shane Van Gisbergen get that early win, get the team locked into playoffs. Well, that's going to have to wait. I think we've talked plenty in the shows where we're making a prediction about how not winning at the road courses, you can't guarantee Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be in the playoffs. I have to say, and I'm curious about your thoughts, Tanner, I feel Dan Suarez is starting to lose a little bit of that confidence. You watch the Atlanta race after the crash, his interview, he sounded just hard on himself. Today, he wasn't so hard on himself, but just that mistake and then to take out Connor Zilic, I feel like maybe Suarez is starting to feel a little bit more of that pressure. So early in the season, that team is not known for being great at the mile-and-a-half tracks. I think it could be a rough 6 weeks for Dan Suarez, and I think these 6 weeks might be telling for Justin Marks what to do for next season.
Yeah, so if I'm approaching this like I'm Justin Marks, I think the first thing I'm doing is trying to, console Daniel, because he had been doing that same maneuver in that same turn 50 times before it, and it had gone just fine every other time. And unfortunately, on that 51st try, he stepped over the line and spun out. And it was really unfortunate, too, because he was having stupendous run today, and he was fast in qualifying. He led the first group yesterday, and he was in the top 10 all day until that spin. And, I saw a good few people online giving him a hard time, like, why did you step on the throttle? And it's like, well, because if he gets back on the throttle because he was back straight, he can basically get back going and, rejoin the race without any damage to his car, and can try to salvage a good finish out of it, because at a road course with 17 turns, they're not going to just throw the yellow flag out. They're going to let them keep racing. And unfortunately, he and his teammate found each other and had a pretty spectacular accident. And thankfully, both of them walked away just fine and are healthy now. So, yeah, as far as Connor is concerned, I mean, I think they should just keep following whatever plan that they have in place with him. I mean, the person he really has to look out for is Mr. H and his big wallet, personally. Like, I know that there was talks last year about Justin Haley hopping into the 48 car. And, nothing against Justin Haley or Alex Bowman for that matter. I think they're both phenomenal drivers. But when you have a guy like Zilich, who was the only car really that was able to truly navigate through the field the way that he was able to do it, you got to think that he could probably take those talents to Hendrick Motorsports' equipment and do even better. And I just feel like if you're Justin Marks and you're trying to make a decision between the two, you've probably got to get Zilich in a cup car sooner rather than later. But it almost feels wrong. Maybe that's the incorrect word, but it just feels incorrect to take the guy that helped build your team up and just so easily kick him to the curb, especially after he's coming off of a playoff season last year where he made it into the round of 12, and maybe had he not had that incident at Talladega, he could have advanced. Who knows? But yeah, it's definitely a tough day for Trackhouse, and I would be doing my best to make sure that I can get the most out of Daniel for the rest of this season and kind of see where all the cards fall, because everything that's happening in Xfinity with Connor Zilich, that's, not in his control necessarily. So if I were Justin Marks, I would control what I can control and make sure that all my drivers are operating at peak performance and peak confidence, rather than trying to figure out in race 3, hey, what should I do about these two guys next year?
Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that, Tanner. Well, just final thoughts overall with the race, that it obviously had a new layout. The first 2 stages, although a lot of chaos initially, did have no cautions for any incidents on the track. Obviously, in the 3rd stage, we had 2 cautions for incidents, and there was a little debate if that caution was even needed. Overall, great racing, and what a finish with those 4 cars in the running for that win at the very end, with no clear outcome until the absolute final corner and no caution. Tanner, Joe, was this a good race for NASCAR to move away from the controversial 2 race weekends at Daytona followed by Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the racing towards the end, we talked about it before we started recording, but it was phenomenal. I can't speak for everybody in here, but I thoroughly enjoyed those last 12 laps, watching Kyle Busch and Christopher Bell duke it out. And then once Busch was unable to really hold the lead, his car kind of fell to the wayside. And then it was a battle between Bell, Byron, and Reddick there to the end. And I got to say, even though Fox, pretty much solely focused on those top 4, which was rather disappointing, considering if you looked at the ticker, you could see drivers swapping spots, or you'd see a driver like drop down a few spots, and you're like, oh, what happened to them? It was a little unfortunate to not be able to watch what was happening throughout the rest of the field. But at the end of the day, we got an incredible finish that was thankfully able to go to the end green without having to resort to overtime and have to worry about the caution light. And that's kind of the beauty of NASCAR racing on road courses, is they're a little bit less likely to throw the caution flag, even if there is some sort of an incident. And I will say this, they could have probably gotten away with not throwing a yellow with the Austin Dillon incident had they had local yellows in NASCAR, but I don't want to get on a diatribe about that, so I'll hang up and listen, as we'll say.
I remember back in the day when kart, they would, you're stuck in the gravel trap, but nobody can hit you. You're just stuck there for the race. Portland comes to mind. Alex and I were stuck in the middle of the Shelton chicane when it was a gravel trap, and they still let the race finish under green. I can understand why maybe things have changed for more safety, cautious awareness, but overall, I felt this was, as you said, Tanner, a good race for NASCAR to say, hey, this is a good racing product. And especially, I kept thinking about what if somebody had watched the Super Bowl? Okay, I've seen these commercials for Pato Ward, Alex Palou, Joseph Newgarden. I'm going to watch this IndyCar race. Oh, and there's NASCAR. I'm curious to watch that too. I was thinking, I'm hoping it's not just going to be a mess where we're just going to have caution after caution after caution, and we're just thinking, what are the NASCAR drivers doing? I felt it was a really good product where the IndyCar race, very good. What do you expect from IndyCar? Seeing the cars in NASCAR slipping and sliding, driver control. I know the Fox cameras were not the greatest today, but there was one camera I always thoroughly enjoyed, the road courses, the foot cam. Having down Shane Van Gisbergen, I think, was really great to show when they did. And overall, even with the limitations of the stages, which, as we said yesterday, everyone's going to pit before the end of the stage, they did. We still had a little bit of strategy towards the end. I so wish NASCAR kept the road courses stage break free, because I think we could have been in for some really exciting racing, and who knows what additional strategies we could have seen throughout the day. But overall, I just feel it has to be feeling good for NASCAR. It's like, hey, we show what our drivers are capable of, putting on a good race, good show. And especially now that they're going to be on FS1 for the next 6 race weekends. Maybe someone's going to tune in, hopefully get into it a little bit more. And we know it's going to be a little while before IndyCar is back on Fox as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for. I agree. What a great race. Joe, you kind of been mentioning it, the double header on Fox this morning. Do you want to kick things over to IndyCar and talk about that great race that took place in St. Pete?
A wonderful race over in St. Pete. Let's bring in Kobe as well too for IndyCar coverage. And overall, the NTT IndyCar Series, St. Petersburg Firestone Grand Prix, saw one caution at the start of the race, lap 1. Overall, by the end of the race, we had 23 cars out of 27 running, with 20 on the lead lap. And of course, speaking about the lead lap traffic became an issue when Alex Palou got shrunk down to where Joseph Newgarden was within striking distance. We saw Stingray Rob trying to stay on the lead lap. A little less than 10 laps to go. Stingray Rob gets passed by Palou. He pulls over, let his fellow Chevrolet driver go by, make the chase, but Palou was able to start pulling away. Newgarden slipped to third, fuel shortage. One of the big things, we saw 3 different strategies in this race. Emily, starting with you, with the 3 different strategies, Palou, he came in, stopped during that lap 1 caution, right away getting rid of that green alternate tire. Do you think he would have been able to pull off that race win or so early on when that occurred?
Well, let me first say, as this is my first opportunity here this season so far on the Grid Network, I know we've been talking about it, but welcome to Fox IndyCar. It was the inaugural race, the premier race, but some things are staying the same, and that is Alex Palou at the top of the podium again. So to answer your question quite earnestly, Joe, no, I did not think that was going to happen. Very transparently, I was waiting for Scotty Mack to kind of get cycled through back to the top of the leaderboard there, and it just never happened. He just could not pick up the deficit between him and Dixon and make his way back into the top 3 again. Something amazing that we, saw obviously in the NASCAR race was that when you're on, street course, road course, it is very unpredictable what's going to happen to the very last corner and the very last lap when you're in these type of alternate strategies. So again, was not expecting Palou to finish on top. I mean, again, he is a expert driver on these type of tracks, but we love a little mystery to start off the IndyCar season.
Yeah, for sure. Seeing Alex Palou do what he did today, it shows you why he's been the best in the business in IndyCar for the last handful of seasons. I know on past shows I've said that Alex Palou might go on a Jimmy Johnson-like run. You have to give a lot of credit to his strategist, Barry Wanzer, as well. I think Barry and Alex might be the new Jimmy and Chad. Who knows? But I think they're going to be winning a lot more races later on this season. I have to agree with you, Emily. Alex Palou, I thought he'd be strong. I thought he'd have a good point stay, at least finish on the podium, but he definitely wasn't my top 2 picks or even 3rd pick to win this race. And he the number 10 team executed the strategy perfectly, and they just played into his hands. And that was a great battle towards the end there between him and Joseph Newgarden. Thought Newgarden was going to catch him, and then Newgarden had some issues there on the last lap. And Palou got around the lap traffic and just made things happen. And like you said, Emily, a lot of things are changed in this new era IndyCar, but one thing is still the same. That is Alex Palou and his domination of this series. And I think going into this season, his biggest goal is probably going to be to win on an oval for the first time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Kobe. And yeah, every time you see Alex Palou get up to the front of the field in these IndyCar races, you just can't help but think about the Jesse Pinkman gif from Breaking Bad. He can't keep getting away with this. He is so ruthlessly consistent, and I bet that is just frustrating for his competitors. Like, this guy just goes in there and just comes out of every race squeaky clean. And, like, I believe that Palou had a less than optimal starting spot coming into this race, and he was able to, through strategy, be able to pick his way through this field. And my God, that final pit stop by that DHL pit crew was lightning fast. You have to really throw your hands off to that, or throw your hats off to that CGR team. They delivered a miraculous pit stop on that final round of stops that put him ahead of Newgarden and then also Scott Dixon after he blended back in, and that effectively won them the race. And I will say it was a little disheartening today to see so few passing. I kind of felt like once you got a spot, it was really hard to let go of it, because for whatever reason, Dirty Air just seemed to play a really big factor today. And at the end of the day, like, Alex Palou, we really shouldn't be all that surprised considering the guy is a back-to-back defending champion, but this is only his 12th race win, and it almost seems like that's not enough for how much he's constantly at the front of the field. And yeah, you just really got to tip your cap to those guys over at CGR, and especially the pit crew. That was a phenomenal final stop and probably will be the stop of the year.
That was an amazing pit stop, and that was essentially the winning move between first and second place, because he got around his teammate Scott Dixon through that final pit stop cycle. Poor Scott Dixon, once again, we saw on the press conference before the race weekend with all the Chip Ganassi team drivers, they're asking, can you get the win finally? Not another second place. He got another second place at St. Pete, a track he hasn't won at. Palou led 26 laps. Scott McLaughlin led the most, 40 laps out of the 100, so he comes home 4th place. And that bonus point, 2 points for leading the most lap. McLaughlin stayed out during that caution on lap 1, along with 9 other drivers. This is where we saw a little bit of that split where McLaughlin got right away onto the prime tires. Not the prime tires, the green alternate tires. A few laps later, switched back to the prime tires. We then saw Lundgaard. He went different, stuck on that black tire, and then took the green alternates all the way to the very end, coming home 8th place. We saw Rossi try to do that, but he had to make another pit stop. But still, Rossi, 10th place finish. Kobe, overall, were the green alternate tires too soft? Or did you like the alternates not lasting more than 12 to 15 laps?
Well, in the case of the drivers, they might have thought it was too soft because of how long they didn't last. But at the same time, I think it adds an interesting element to the race because usually when you have this alternative compound, you get like a short term game for a long term loss because you're fast at the beginning of the run, but then the tires fall off versus the primary compound where you might not be as fast at the start of a run, but your pace is going to be consistent all throughout. As we saw today, a lot of drivers had quite a bit of trouble on the alternate tire compound compared to the primary, and it made the race interesting. Although, as Tanner mentioned, we didn't really see as much passing as we'd like to see. We'd hope that the tires would play a big difference, in this, but unfortunately, it didn't really seem like that was the case. But it certainly made things interesting at the very least.
Yeah, definitely, and I will say the tire lasting so long on Lundgaard's car there at the end is certainly miraculous, considering how most everybody else was quickly ready to just go back over to the primary tire earlier in the event. And, I really would have liked to have seen this race play out where those drivers that had to be on the green tire to start out with actually had to drive with it, because we only got 5 corners in, unfortunately, before an accident developed. So it would have been a little bit more interesting of a race, I think, had the tire actually been used by like half of the competition. But at the end of the day, it was a really neat experiment. I think I would have preferred the tire last about 15 to 20 laps, considering it's a 100 lap race. Like if this was closer to like a 75 or to an 80 lap race, like you would see it like Detroit, I think this tire would have had a little bit more success and a little bit more staying power with the competition. But at the end of the day, for Firestone, I really liked that they brought this tire to the track. I definitely think it added a strategy element to the race that would have been lacking otherwise. But I think if the tire had just lasted a little longer, I think I would have preferred that.
I agree with both of you, gentlemen. And to your point, Tanner, had the caution not happened, we could have had a completely different outcome at the end of this race. And again, I think for average, these tires were lasting about 12 laps with the intention of giving more grip to these drivers. So is it really worth it getting more grip when, to everyone's point, we were not seeing a lot of passing happening, to come in and lose like upwards of 30 seconds to come and get a tire change happening? So again, the chaotic part of me is all for this. It makes things interesting. It forces drivers to come in and work on alternate strategies. So there is a bit of an unknown factor going into a street course race that has historically benefited the leader overcutting and staying out there as long as possible. I will just say, as a fun little fact, our technically recorded winner from the 2024 St. Petersburg Grand Prix, Pato Award, had a similar victory with having an early on alternate tire and then ending at the primaries at the end. Of course, we know he didn't win it on the street, but a fun little fact for the history book.
Interesting point about that. Last year, Pato, of course, getting that win after what happened to Newgarden. Now, Palou today was quite lousy, and he wasn't the only one. Colton Herta, 2 poor pit stops. That did not help him at all. Will Power makes contact, rear ends Nolan Siegel, causing a 3-car crash on lap 1 that brought to caution. So those drivers have a bit of a points deficit to climb out. As you see, Alex Palou leads. Pato, that team just did not seem to have a good car. Some pit road issues. Colton, the pit crew has to feel pretty bad, and just one of those deals that's been mentioned. It seems once you got a position, it was tricky to pass. And even with the alternate tire, maybe it was a little longer. We could have seen a little bit more, but it's one of those deals. The first lap caution threw out a lot of strategy. Tanner, were you surprised by these three drivers having such a poor day at St. Pete's?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, you never want to predict a lap one accident, but it's unfortunately not something we haven't seen at St. Pete before. I believe it might have been last year's race. Started out very similarly, or had a crash somewhat towards the beginning of the event. But yeah, like it was a really unfortunate accident, and for these drivers starting in 11th, 13th, and 16th in the middle of the grid, it's really disappointing to see them have all this off season of work to come into St. Pete, raring to go, and then you wreck before you even complete a lap. So yeah, it was a little disappointing to see someone of Will Power's caliber kind of just bulldoze through Nolan Siegel in that corner and cause that accident. But not everybody can have an on day. As for the other two, Colton Herta, I don't think anyone could have necessarily predicted that his pit crew would have just the worst day ever. But I did see a number of people on social media be like, well, it's an Andretti pit stop, so of course something had to go wrong. So maybe there's a bit more of a pattern there that I'm not as privy to, but it's really unfortunate for him because it looked like he and the entire Andretti crew had a very strong set of cars, and it didn't seem like any of them outside of Kirkwood had like a truly clean race and were able to really take advantage of it. And as far as Pato is concerned, it looks like they fought with the car all weekend. And honestly, I think 11th is a really good recovery considering they had to make an unscheduled stop under green and they were like 50 seconds to a minute behind the leader of the event. And honestly, I feel like to get 11th out of that kind of a day where you have so many like misadventures basically and just miscues is a small win in a otherwise very disappointing day for them. I'm sure they would have liked to have come out here and established themselves as title contenders, but they'll have to wait until the next race to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tanner. And I think ultimately we can all agree just not a good day for Arrow McLaren. I mean, even Christian Lundgaard, who was running in like second place or in podium finishing position for a good majority of the race, for him to fall to eighth after all of that, extremely disappointing. Obviously, we talked about Nolan Siegel's extremely devastating and out of his control end to his race very early on. And then to your point, Tanner, Pato just fighting the car the entire weekend, just disastrous qualifying. So yeah, I agree. Ending in 11th in the lead lap and being able to come up and get as many points as he did compared to if he would have ended the race where he started with like a measly 5 points. Like I hope he can take some positives away from this. Colton Herta's pit stops just, oh my gosh, like my heart broke for him when he was asking his pit crew what he could do to help with the fuel problem. And then again, kind of concluding on a theme here with Palou starting his 2025 season on a high note. I guess Will Power is also starting his on a similar low note that last season he ended with. So onwards and upwards to Thermal for I'm sure all of these drivers trying to just kind of bank this one and move on to next race weekend.
Yeah, these three drivers had quite the weekend. Pato Award. I was really surprised to see how far off him and that number 5 team were from the start of the weekend because they really messed up in qualifying. You know, when Pato got bounced out of Q1 there, I honestly thought Pato was going to end up getting all the way to the Firestone Fast 6 and start up front, you know, and be a contender like he has been at St. Pete, you know, in the last handful of races there. Yeah, and for him to start deep in the pack and given the difficulty of passing and all of that, we knew it was going to be a tough day for Pato. And where he finished in this race in 11th place, I think given given the circumstances that were against him heading into his race. I think he has to take that as a win, like doing the best that we could, given how we got set far back in qualifying. So he did the best he could do, and survive, the lap one chaos. I thought we were going to see more crashes throughout the day, but surprisingly, after what happened on lap one, it was a relatively smooth and clean race. So got to give a hand to all the NTT IndyCar Series drivers for putting on a relatively clean race, minus lap one. And Colton Herta, I have to agree with you, Emily. Heartbreaking for Colton Herta because he did everything right behind the wheel, but fortunately, pit crew just let him down there, and that's why racing is a team sport. We win as a team, lose as a team, and today they all lost as a team. Colton Herta didn't really do anything wrong as a driver, but unfortunately, pit crew just has to be better. But we also have to think these guys have been sitting on the sidelines, since since the early fall last year. So they haven't really done any competitive pit stops outside of, well, they haven't done any outside of practice, for the races away from the track. So so of course they're going to be rusty. They're going to have some slip ups, but it's good, get this out of the way early and continue to improve when those reps come throughout the season. And Will Power, this is definitely not how he needed to start off the season. And if you watch my prediction on the grid roundtable a few nights ago, I said that given everything that's going on with Will Power, with his age, where he is right now, and last year of his contract. I said that this would, and also changing his driver management team. I predicted that this would be his last year as a Team Penske driver. And if you watch today's IndyCar race on Fox, the announcers were talking about it as well, saying that you have this young kid, David Malukas, at AJ Foyt Racing, who everyone believes is not on the AJ Foyt Racing contract. They believe he has a Team Penske contract, and he's the top candidate to potentially replace Will Power. And if you're Will Power, you see David Malukas, had a relatively solid day racing his teammate Santino Ferrucci all day long. Solid day from David, and then Will Power, didn't even get to complete a single lap. You have to look at that if you're Will Power, like, oh gosh, we're starting the year off in a hole. And then you have this young kid, David Malukas, who may be taking my seat next year. I want to prove that I still got it, as I'm getting to my mid-40s and older. But also at the same time, when Joseph Newgarden and Scott McLaughlin, what happened last year, the push to pass scandal. First, they had the top of the standings, and then, they were at the very back. And you see Scott McLaughlin, especially, he climbed well up in the standings last year and could have won the championship if it wasn't for that points penalty. So just because Will Power had one bad day, that doesn't necessarily mean that this season is over and that. But I think, since obviously if the Fox broadcasters are talking about, the Malukas rumors about Will Power potentially being replaced, at some point, if this was just isn't a one-time thing and Will Power, goes to Thermal Club, doesn't have a good race there, has a poor finish, and then the season, just doesn't get much better from there, then the pressure is going to continue to grow on Will Power to perform. Or, like I said on Roundtable, he could end up being out of Team Penske. And one driver you didn't mention, Joe, Louis Foster, who ended up finishing dead last in this race. Imagine being the Indy next champion. You're so excited to get this opportunity to race an IndyCar, and you don't even get to complete one lap in your IndyCar debut. So this was his official debut in IndyCar, not complete a lap, but Thermal Club, he's hoping that's going to be his real IndyCar debut. It's such a shame because Louis was very excited to race in IndyCar.
Yeah, it was tough to see Louis out early. It's going to be interesting. Barber Motorsport Park, great opportunity for them to rebound. Two drivers are going to try to continue a streak of top 10 finishes, finishing up towards the front. Rinus VK, Alexander Rossi, first, both of them with brand new teams. Well, brand new teams for them. Dale Coyne Racing been around a long time. Rinus VK comes to them. Alexander Rossi joining Ed Carpenter Racing. They've been around for quite some time as well, too. Emily, how big of a motivator can this be for both their drivers and their respective teams?
Well, Joe, I just want to say just a silly thing. When I was watching practice on Friday, Hinch kept referring to it as ECR, and I don't know what happened to me in the off season, but I kept going like, what is ECR? It's Ed Carpenter Racing. I guess I just call it Ed Carpenter Racing. So that took me a moment to figure out on Friday. So much more prepared going into today. But wow, like what a unexpected great finish for both of those drivers. Again, Rossi was running in the top 10 all day long, and then all of a sudden I was paying attention to VK as well, who's finishing in 9th place. Of course, there were some circumstances that put some of these cars behind them. They technically finished ahead of some McLarens and Andretti global car, a Ganassi vehicle, and obviously Will Power in a Penske car. But oh my gosh, just unexpected, great momentum. I hope both of these drivers who are operating in obviously smaller teams and smaller funding count going into them just have great momentum going into the next race for them. And again, I'm the fun facts girl today. I just saw that it was Dale Coyne Racing's first top 10 in 2 years. So great for these two small teams. And they should just feel mission accomplished.
Yeah, definitely a great result for Rinus VeeKay and Alexander Rossi. And in this race, on the roundtable, we were talking about expectations, especially for Ed Carpenter racing. I'll be honest, I didn't have a single Ed Carpenter car finishing in the top 10 in this race. So kudos to Alexander Rossi for being able to drag that car to the front. I know, especially after they didn't really perform well during the preseason test at Sebring. That's why I said what I said on the roundtable, why I didn't really have too many expectations outside of the Indianapolis 500 for Ed Carpenter Racing. But maybe they found something here. But I know it was just one race, so it's really tough to say, whether this is a sign of things to come, or we could see Alexander Rossi or Christian Rasmussen finishing in the top 10, several more times this year. But I think it's definitely a great start for Rossi, and we'll see what that 20 team can do throughout the year. But Rinus VeeKay, you have to feel happy for him given how things ended with Ed Carpenter Racing when he was let go, and he assumed that he was gonna stay. Sometimes that business on the business side of things can get kind of messy. I think Rinus VeeKay has a lot to prove this year. That he's still a top talent in the IndyCar series, and that he should be driving for one of the top teams in the sport. But I think that this is a great opportunity for Rinus, and looking forward to seeing what he's able to do throughout the rest of the year. I think with Dale Coyne Racing, you don't really have too many expectations, so he can basically race pressure free.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely got to be pretty stoked about those performances if you're both of those teams. I feel like coming into 2025 with a completely new driver lineup, if you're Ed Carpenter Racing, you've definitely got to come out of this weekend with your heads held high and your noses in the air, because I'm going to be honest, I feel like a top 10 at a road course, a street course no less, is definitely a sign of good things to come, hopefully, for that team. I was extremely impressed with VeeKay and Dale Coyne's performance. I mean, like Emily said, they hadn't had a top 10 in 2 years, and for them to have had such a resounding comeback in their first race with a new driver is pretty encouraging. I mean, obviously, when you have, like, last year's race had 97 position passes. In contrast, this year's had 53 and more green flag racing. So, you have to some extent, temper your excitement about these kind of results when it seems like everybody had, to some extent, a tremendous time trying to make a pass. And it was pretty interesting. You'd see somebody on the intervals, like, gain on somebody, and then 5 laps later, they'd still be about a second behind them because they just couldn't get any closer, which was really unfortunate. But at the same time, that's not Dale Coyne's or Ed Carpenter's fault, and I'm sure they're extremely happy with these results. And I think going into the rest of the season, you've definitely got to see this as a motivation going forward and try to keep the great performances moving, because, in the NTT IndyCar series, anything can happen in the fastest racing on earth.
Fastest racing on earth. It's a long season. And of course, IndyCar and Fox. I have to close this out with this because I think everyone was really interested to see how Fox will do first time with the NTT IndyCar series. First time Will Buxton, lead commentator for IndyCar. Jack Harvey, a brand new pit road reporter. We had Jamie Little rather than Georgia Hannaberry, who is at home, recently gave birth to a healthy baby. Then the familiar faces, Townsend Bell, James Hinchcliffe, Kevin Lee, they were all there. Plus the new graphics, which I gotta say, they look good. Little glitches here and there, and a few of the comic book characters that Fox is known for. Kobe, thoughts on your first race one, essentially, of the IndyCar on Fox experience?
Well, for it to be the first race, I don't really have too many major criticisms. Obviously, Joe, you just mentioned, some of the things didn't go right graphics wise, and I'm sure that they already know that by now. So they're going to be working on that. By the time we get to Thermal Club, we'll probably see some improvements there. And I'm just going to go down the line of names that you mentioned. Will Buxton, for first time being play-by-play for IndyCar. Yeah, I honestly didn't think he did as bad of a job as some of my two co-hosts, Matt White and Joshua Birch, expected that he would do. Yeah, and it was, like I said, it was the first race for Will. I'm sure he's going to continue to get more comfortable in the role and improve over time. But I honestly thought Will Buxton did a great job. Although I got kind of nervous there towards the end with 2 laps to go, I thought he was about to have a Marty Reed moment and called him to the line 1 lap early because he was talking about the final lap on with 2 laps to go, and I'm not sure if you guys heard that, but I honestly got a little concerned there for
Yeah.
Will Buxton. Even if he thought it was the final lap, I hope someone whispered into his ear, be like, "No, we got 2 laps to go," and played it all. But I honestly thought it was about to call the race 1 lap early, and I was getting a little concerned. But hopefully that wasn't the case. And then Jack Harvey, new pit road reporter, he admitted on his social media that this is a challenge for him, something new that he's going to work hard to improve throughout the year. I think for his first time being a pit road reporter, especially with no practice, he admitted that that his first time practicing for this, was when he went out, to do this, during first practice and all of that. So Jack's going to grow in the role, and Jamie Little, I think she was a good replacement for Georgia Hannaberry, until she's coming back, because Jamie, she has IndyCar experience. I remember growing up watching IndyCar on ABC. She was in the pit lanes there, so she knows IndyCar well. And then the other things is also important for the fans to have those familiar voices, and Townsend Bell, James Hinchcliffe, and Kevin Lee working on pit road as well. And I really like the starting lineup, how they went all the way they went from the top of the grid to the very back of the grid with the drivers saying their name and where they're from. It kind of gave me that Sunday Night Football feel when they were doing that, and you can tell Fox has really put in a lot of effort into IndyCar on Fox, and I think it showed. Was the broadcast perfect by any means? No, it wasn't. And there's no perfect broadcast out there, but I could tell that Fox is serious about IndyCar and promoting the sport and helping it grow. So I'm still optimistic that this is going to end up being a good deal for IndyCar at the end of the race. I know IndyCar.com had some issues with its timing and score and the website in general at the start of the race, and we can only hope that's because of all of the promotions that Fox has been doing and an increase of marketing IndyCar in general. Hopefully the website crashed because there's an increased interest of IndyCar, which will be a fantastic thing for the sport. But good thing they eventually got it back up, because I think IndyCar has a lot of potential. And I think Joseph Newgarden said, I can't remember if it was during practice, qualifying, or race today, but he said that IndyCar has a really great story. You just need someone to really go out there and just tell it, and hopefully Fox will do a great job at telling it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, Kobe, because you were touching on your final point, what I was going to bring up first. And that's, if the racing is great, then the production of the racing is kind of secondary to that. So as long as the drivers and teams, show up and put on a good race, then, IndyCar on a major network is going to bloom and thrive, I think. But I did have a few nitpicks with the broadcast. They acted like Push to Pass was like the boogeyman. They would not talk about it for most of the event. It was kind of odd that they wouldn't talk about that as a hybrid component at all. And I am a little concerned as to why they didn't. Like, I had to go to the IndyCar app, which if you don't have it and you do watch IndyCar, definitely recommend downloading it because it has a bunch of great timing and scoring stuff. Unfortunately, if you were trying to access their website today, you may have had a little bit of trouble to start the event. But at the end of the day, like, I had a couple of problems with Will Buxton. I definitely was getting he was definitely hammering the nail in the final coffin there, 1 lap a little too early, unfortunately. But thankfully, it seems like maybe Townsend or Hinch probably elbowed him and was like, it's two laps to go. So we were able to get back on course. I definitely felt like the ticker was taking up way too much space on the screen in a lot of cases. So maybe they can fiddle with that a little bit. Like, I understand that, some of the names are quite long. Like, you have like Newgarden out there. It's a lot of letters, and McLaughlin, and, you have to fit them all on the screen. But man, I felt like the font was really, really large in a lot of cases. So maybe shrink the font size down a little bit and make room for like tire compounds. And are they using their hybrid, or how many push to pass seconds do they have left? They've got to get a little bit better at those like smaller things, I think, as far as the presentation and just the commentary are concerned. But overall, it was a pretty clean broadcast. I think Jamie Little did a great job in her spot gig. She is a phenomenal pit reporter. I hear a lot of people say a lot, like, why is she in the NASCAR Truck Series booth when she's such a great pit reporter? And I kind of agree with that. But her interview in Victory Lane with Alex Palou was fantastic and helped really keep his energy up throughout it. And I think that in order to help sell IndyCar a little bit more to the more casual race fan, you're going to have to, endear them to these drivers' personalities. And Jamie Little did a really good job in Victory Lane of helping bring Palou's personality out. Overall, I think Fox did a 7.5 out of 10 job today. And honestly, for a first crack at it, that's pretty solid. And I would just like Will Buxton just speed up how he talks just a little bit, because it honestly felt like he was thinking before saying every single word today.
I do know, Tanner, that he himself has said that he's a chronically quick talker. So I don't know if he's just very conscious of that. I don't know. I will say before, I agree with both you and Kobe. Matt and Joshua, if you're watching, since Kobe name dropped you on the air, this is your chance to say if you agree with where you previously stood about your predictions of Buxton's performance. But I agree with everything that's been said. Obviously, as someone who loves this series, was really curious, slightly concerned what was going to happen moving from NBC to Fox. I think, listen, something needed to happen, right? Like, there is clearly a viewership problem with getting butts into seats at these races. So something needs to take place to kind of spark change. And initially, those marketing promotions coming from Fox, that is setting the tone that you are in for a rebranding. This is edgy. This is fun. This is rock and roll. The intro to today's race, having Motley Crue kick us off, like, that is just the perfect tone. Again, I have some nitpicks here and there with the rebranding. It seems like Fox is really trying to get these new viewers to tune in and to kind of set up, the new audiences joining us. Please, Fox, thermal, or some point this season, please bring back the timers for pit stops and explain the importance of when you have a slow stop. We, the regular watchers, can tell when something is slow, or like how devastating not getting Colton Herta's like rear tire on is going to end his race, but the casual watcher may not pick up on that. So again, very nitpicky. I think Buxton was fine. I think the trio is going to figure out their cadence. It kind of felt like some of the bantering from Townsend and Inch wasn't as prominent as it normally would have been on NBC. But maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. I missed it, but I'm excited. It's a new era. I really want this to work on Fox, because ultimately I want everyone to fall in love with the series that we all love so dearly.
It was a lot of fun. Great to see Fox, and overall seems to be positive. We'll be interested to see how the race will turn out later this week. In the chat room, Adam, get rid of the cartoons. I feel the cartoons, like, I heard the story of the purpose behind them. That just something, though. They weren't prominently featured like compared to NASCAR and the NFL, but they did show up here and there. And it's like, well, okay, it is Fox, but overall, like, everything that was it, from the music, the presentation, tweaks here and there that could be worked out. Looking forward to what they bring at Barber Motorsports Park. With that said, we just got MotoGP left to recap. Kobe, what a first race weekend! What a first race weekend for Ducati and Marc Marquez.
Yeah, and also MotoGP is on Fox this year. If you're watching here in the United States, and Joe, I don't recall seeing any cartoon characters during the MotoGP broadcast. Very, very, very early Sunday morning for us here on the East Coast. But Marc Marquez, it was all about him this weekend because he completed the clean sweep of the pole, sprint, and the Thailand Grand Prix race win. He looked unbeatable all weekend, and even when he fell to second place, he stayed behind his younger brother Alex Marquez, who led until 4 laps to go. But it was Marc Marquez pulling ahead to claim his first win as a Ducati factory rider. So, Joe, how big of a statement was this weekend from Marc Marquez?
This was huge. From what we saw in testing this weekend, I had a lot of confidence that Marc Marquez was going to get this win and just be the Marc Marquez we used to see when he was winning championships consistently with the Repsol Honda team. Not the Marc Marquez we have seen since 2020 injury, where it seemed he push it, he either won a couple races or he crashes out pushing too hard. We saw a little bit of that last year, but I felt towards the end of the year, especially once he knew he had the factory ride lined up, he got better and better. He looks unstoppable. He had full control of that race. I mean, Kobe, even when we saw Alex leading and he was just right there behind, I kept thinking, is he going to use that dirty air to damage his tires? Surprisingly, though, as soon as he got around, he pulled away, just made it look like he was toying with everybody, including his teammate Pecco Bagnaia, which he had to go to Q1 to get into Q2. So he didn't exactly have that great a weekend where Marc Marquez put on a clinic. You would think he was with the Ducati longer than Pecco Bagnaia. What a statement by Marc Marquez. He is going to be hard to beat this year if he keeps up this level.
Yeah, and we all know in the last few years, Marc Marquez has been injured a lot, and he's kind of like just an ordinary MotoGP rider out there instead of the special guy we saw who won all them championships, and went on that special run before all of the injuries set in. I've been very hesitant to say this given his injury history, but after what I saw this weekend, I'm going to say this with confidence. Marc Marquez is officially back, and I think that's scary for the rest of the competition. Before joining Grid Network, I'll be honest, I knew absolutely nothing about MotoGP, but I knew about MotoGP, and I knew the names that would always come up, like Jorge Lorenzo. You had Valentino Rossi, and then Marc Marquez was a name that I always heard, although I didn't know much about MotoGP. And then once I finally started paying attention to it, it was when he finally started to get hurt, and now he's looking like a rider who is healed for the most part from those injuries, and he's on he's on the best bike. I think someone said on the MotoGP broadcast, they said when you put the best rider out there on the best bike, this is the results you're gonna get. And I mean, there's in no way to disrespect the most recent world champion Jorge Martin at all, but I think I see why Ducati decided to pick Marc Marquez over Jorge Martin, because Marc Marquez has he obviously had a lot left in the tank, and I think they're going to be rewarded for the decision that they made. I also can't blame Jorge for being upset either, but Marc Marquez, he was clearly the right person to go on this factory Ducati bike, and also I believe that Marc Marquez was the first person to win their Ducati factory debut since Casey Stoner back in 2007, if I have that fact correct, to show you how rare this is. And it was just an incredible performance for him all weekend. And even Pecco Bagnaia said it after the race. Joe, you mentioned about Marc toying with them. Those exact words came out of Pecco's mouth when they interviewed him. He said, I think Marc was just like toying around and messing with us. Like he could have beat them by a much bigger margin, but he was just messing around and taking it easy. And if Marc Marquez wasn't riding at 100%, throughout that race, like imagine what he could do when he's at 100%. Like you're right, Joe, he might be extremely hard to beat. And I think that this was a massive statement that he made this race weekend. And Pecco Bagnaia, who's usually the number one rider on his team, I have a feeling, Pecco, you might have to move over this season. Marc Marquez might come in and steal your thunder as a number one Ducati factory rider in that driver lineup. And speaking of Ducati, they've won 18 consecutive races in MotoGP and closing in on the record of 22 set by Honda. And my co-hosts already talked about them. Joshua Birch and Matt White, they jokingly like to call MotoGP the Ducati Cup at the top, and then everyone else. And that's basically what it's been in MotoGP lately. In the top 4 finishers were all Ducati riders, and the highest finisher non-Ducati rider was Ayogura, who finished 5th in the Trackhouse Aprilia. Can Ducati tie or break the record set by Honda? And do you think they can be beaten at all this year?
The way they're looking, they're going to break this record by Honda. The next few tracks, they're good for Marc Marquez. He should easily stay on top of the game, get those wins, extend his points lead, and he's going to put everybody in a world of hurt. Aprilia, I mean, granted, Jorge Martin was out. A lot of people were really curious to see how that started off. I have to say, it's starting off rather disastrously when you missed that first race, and you're now 37 points behind Marc Marquez. Every point's going to matter. The king of the sprints, Martin, when he comes back, he has to put on a heck of an effort because I'm not convinced the Aprilias are really up there. I mean, Trackhouse, great effort by that rookie. KTM, they just did not seem to have the pace. Then Yamaha, we saw the Fabio Quartararo up there. He just still is not on the same level as when he won the championship. That Yamaha still has some progress to do. And then Honda, I mean, when we saw Mir crashing out, I was just thinking, boy, Honda has really just fallen from what it used to be with Marc Marquez, the long relationship with Repsol, to now it's just a bike that says Honda, some Castrol stickers. You got Warren Mir, a past champion rider, but he can't do anything with that bike. Ducati, I think, has this already. The only way is if for some reason the Aprilias really find something extra, especially when the Jorge Martin comes back. But that's starting to look very slim already.
Yeah, at least for the first few races. I think Jorge Martin has already been ruled out for the next race, the Argentina Grand Prix. Yeah, so he's going to be on the mend for a little bit, and we didn't look for him to contend this year for the championship on that Aprilia anyway, but that showed some promising pace and testing, like maybe once, twice, maybe 3 times this season. You know, if Jorge Martin is back at full strength and Aprilia get the bike right for the race, maybe he can sneak a win or two. But I have to agree with you, Joe. I think Ducati is probably going to, you know, run away with it this year, kind of like they have, kind of like they did last year, and all of that. And looking at where Honda is right now, I kind of hate to say this, but if I was talking to Honda right now, I would want to ask them, like, what are you even doing out here? Like, why are you still in MotoGP? Because compared to where they were during their glory years of Marc Marquez, Honda has completely fallen off a cliff and taken a complete nosedive. It's really sad considering where they were and where they are now, because it really hurts their legacy in MotoGP when to see how badly they're struggling. And also, I'm sure Fabio Quartararo is frustrated as well on the Yamaha, and seeing how far he finished down the running order. We know what Fabio Quartararo is capable of when he's on a good bike. You know, that's not representative of who he is as a rider. And, you know, it's just hard to see those two manufacturers really struggling. But if you're a Ducati rider, you have to be very happy with the way things are going right now, and also have to give a shout out to the Trackhouse Aprilia rider Ayogura for such a spectacular debut race weekend in MotoGP. And funny, Joe, last year you were calling Pedro Acosta the super rookie, and I think Ayogura said, "Hold my beer. He might be the real super rookie this year." I know Justin Marks, you know, he mentioned him this morning on his social media, and he's very high on Ayogura as well, like could be a future star in MotoGP. I know Pedro Acosta had a real rough race in the Grand Prix in Thailand. You know, he slid off the bike early in the racing and didn't have the finish that he really wanted. It's going to be interesting to see how Acosta does in year 2 and how Ogura does throughout the rest of the year. But if he can, you know, drag that Trackhouse Aprilia to some great finishes this year, you know, I have a feeling he's going to have some of the bigger teams knocking on his door in the future. And the next MotoGP race weekend is March 14th through 16th. So just a couple of weeks away with the Argentina Grand Prix. And with that said, we're going to bring Emily and Tanner back on for a great one shining moment from this race weekend. And if you're watching live or on replay, let us know down in the comments, what's the one thing that stood out the most from this racing weekend, in your opinion, between NASCAR, INDYCAR, and MotoGP? And we'll let you go first. Emily, what's your one shining moment?
Well, we actually didn't talk about it that much here on the show, but can we just all just bow our hats to Scott Dixon? Oh my gosh, he had no communications the entire race. He had to kind of gauge when he needed to pit himself based on his fuel levels. He did have a spotter. He was doing that all on his own, essentially, and then had a last minute overtake of Joseph Newgarden to end up in second place. I mean, I almost wish the stars could have aligned for him so he could have won this. But jokingly, I said to my cohorts here before we came on the air, we should all just bet on Scott Dixon to finish on the podium, like no matter what. Like he could have started at the Grand Prix of Long Beach this weekend and in last place and still ended up in the podium at this race this weekend. So Scott Dixon, we are so lucky that we get to watch him race. What a true professional.
Yes, Dixon obviously put up a fantastic performance this week, and you've definitely got to tip your cap to CGR. But I'm actually going to shine my light on the sweat dripping off of the beef in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. So we had a couple of different things happen. So for the third week in a row, Chris Wright managed to find himself into Josh Bilicki's car somehow. And Josh Bilicki happened to take to social media to take him down a notch, so to speak. And I would definitely recommend checking Twitter for the exact phrasing. But yeah, he definitely put Chris Wright in his place, so to speak. Then there was an additional dialogue between Sheldon Creed and Jesse Love. Those two, I believe it was in stage 2, started trading paint with each other in the stadium section, and then coming out of turn 19, Sheldon Creed pushed his former race car in the number 2 car driven by Jesse Love into the gravel on the outside of that turn. But after the race, Sheldon Creed thought it was a good idea, who finished 12th, to go onto Twitter and say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, ha, ha, ha. You know, he's trying to be funny. And then Jesse Love quoted that tweet and said, scoreboard, buddy, because Jesse Love came back and finished 6th in that race. So I really like that the drivers are starting to be a little bit more active on social media and willing to, take their beef to the digital sphere and, kind of let fans kind of tag on and egg them on, because that's kind of what the sport really thrives on, is conflict. And it's really nice to see that these younger drivers are embracing that brand of conflict a little bit more than, say, the William Byron generation, who prefer to just have a very sterile and PR-friendly presence.
My shining moment comes from MotoGP. I think it has to be Marc Marquez, what he did. I mean, this rider, Marc Marquez, the story, if he could get a championship, the comeback he had to go through from the injuries, there was a while where we thought he might be done. He might be to the point where he's going to retire because of all these injuries. Is he even safe to be out there? Last year was that rebuilding year. Was there mistakes? Of course. But he still got a couple wins. And now this is the Marc Marquez that was the 2-time grid ranking world champion. I think he could be a favorite for the 3rd time. He is looking unbeatable at the moment. And when you have one of your most popular riders of the sport having success, that's going to just bring a lot more attention. The fact that Fox Sports is going to have MotoGP, I think this could be setting up for people to see how great of a rider he is. Add on to that legacy, and the added bonus, if we see Pecco Bagnaia step up his game, if Jorge Martin could overcome this 37-point deficit from missing that first race and bring a championship fight, MotoGP, the track product, some of the best racing out there. But I think for starting off the season to have your biggest star, Marc Marquez, taking the win in dominant fashion, that is my shining moment.
Yeah, my shining moment, I got to give it to the people who came up with the decision to change the layout for the NASCAR race weekend at COTA. When they first announced the national circuit, I was a little skeptical how this was going to work. But I think given the change of the layout, it really changed the flow of the racetrack and how the drivers were driving. I think the national circuit was more stock car friendly compared to the full Formula One Grand Prix layout, and I thought the Xfinity race and the Cup race were excellent this weekend. That battle on Saturday, I'm sure they're going to talk about it tomorrow on the Grid Encore show. It was amazing to watch Connor Zilisch and Carson Kroppel go at it. Saw some really good racing there at the end of Xfinity, and then the Cup race today. That final run was just magical. And I think Matt Weaver, motorsports journalist, described it best. That was a really good professional NASCAR road course race. That it was just hard nosed, and the drivers were really just leaving it all out there in both Xfinity and Cup. I just really thought that was it was a really strong race weekend to show why stock cars on road courses. It was a lot of fun to watch.
It was a lot of fun to watch, a very fun weekend, and we're not done recapping it. Tomorrow, Grid Encore, Ben will be on the air. I believe either Brandon or Tanner, one of you all. I know Ben will let me know who's going to be on the air with him, but plenty to talk about from the Xfinity Series. Wednesday, Kobe, I know you're on the air with Josh and Matt for Grid Tonight. Thursday, we're going to start a brand new NASCAR race preview, moving that, because Saturday, Grid Roundtable is now time for the F1 predictions, so don't miss that. Saturday, noon Eastern, and then, of course, it's March, Women's History Month. Women in Motorsport is coming back. Emily will be on the air, as well as myself, Ben, and potentially more guests as well. So subscribe to the Grid Network. Don't miss any of our programs right here at gridnetworktv.com. Matthew Bro will have his write-up from the race weekend at Circuits of America. For Emily, Kobe, and Tanner, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's show. We'll see you next time.